Draco Malfoy, and the year when everyone suddenly paid attention to him. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 3. Information is power. The next morning, Harry tried to call Draco over to Gryffindor table for breakfast, but Draco had to regretfully drop over to his own house table to retrieve his timetable. He cut the line, though, purposefully placing himself in Snape's range of movement, and when his head of house turned to him, he narrowed his eyes and regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion. "How nice of you to drop in with your own house, Mr. Malfoy." His teacher sniped, looking at him expectantly. "Now, pray tell, what newt courses would you like to sign up for?" 7 in total, Draco told him, eager to get this over with as quickly and efficiently as possible. Ancient runes, arithmancy, charms, defense against the dark arts, herbology, potions, transfigurations. Snape nodded, pursing his lips and brandishing his wand at his notes. Then he handed Draco a parchment with his fully filled timetable. "There you go," he quipped with a sour look. "Go run to the Gryffindor table." Draco tried hard not to blush, unsuccessfully, and fled. He took the seat opposite Harry, where his friends were already scanning their own timetables. "Draco!" Hermione smiled, leaning into him to peek at his schedule. "Oh, we have the exact same classes! This is wonderful!" "Thank Merlin!" Draco agreed wholeheartedly. "1 year that I don't have to cower in corners and stay clear from everyone. What about you?" he asked, meeting Harry's eyes. "Which classes did you take up?" "Charms, DADA, herbology, potions, transfiguration," Harry recited. "Well, we'll have all these together too," Draco grinned. "Cheers!" Harry smirked back, seeming as delighted by the prospect as he was. "There are also so many free periods," Weasley grinned. "We're starting off with one right now." "Well, speak for yourself," Draco snorted. "I think I have one tucked away somewhere, but other than that, I think Hermione and I are pretty booked." "Also, you're supposed to use these 3 periods to study, Ron," Hermione reminded him sternly. "Newts will be coming up soon." "Not until the end of 7th year," Weasley protested oddly. "We just finished our hours." "Still, that doesn't mean our workload is going to lessen. We're advanced students now, after all." Weasley looked like she'd just told him Christmas had been cancelled. His expression didn't hold, though, because at that moment, Brown and Patel chose to pass behind him, and Brown laid a hand on his shoulder and greeted him with a giggly, "Hello, Ron." Aghast, Weasley turned to gaze at her, bringing out a stilted, hello." Brown blushed, and another rush of giggles followed. Draco raised his eyebrows at the performance, but then his eyes fell on Patil next to her, who was not so subtly trying to catch his eyes. "Hi, Draco," she smiled, waving at him, and Draco went some weird shade of purple. "Ugh, please, no." Unable to summon words, he just nodded, watching apprehensively as the girls continued on to the entrance hall, heads put together and whispering. Weasley looked after them, still flabbergasted, though, unlike Draco, quite self-satisfied. Harry, on the other hand, was maltreating one of his leftover sausages, spewing it over and over again with his fork, but showing no inclination to actually eat it. His face was murderous. Hermione, too, looked far from pleased. She was folding her timetable into a neat square, the edges sharp enough to cut someone's throat. "I think it's time for our ancient runes lesson," she announced after a couple of moments of tense silence. "Let's go, Draco." "Yeah," he nodded, clearing his throat. "Let's." Hermione hadn't been wrong with the amount of work that awaited them this school year. Ancient runes left him and Hermione with tons of homework, and Draco doubted that they would fare any better in their second lesson of the day, which was defense against the dark arts with Snape. Homework was the least of Draco's worries, though, as they met Harry and Weasley in the corridor in front of Snape's new classroom. His friend's jaw set to pay attention. Harry's hatred for Snape, if anything, had intensified since the death of his godfather, and Draco couldn't help but feel that having the man teach his favorite subject was going to end in a complete disaster. Draco still didn't know how exactly their occlumency lessons last term had come to such an abrupt stop. Harry refused to fill him in on the details, but he couldn't help but think that something big had happened, and whatever it was going to influence their teacher-student relationship this school year to a great extent. As it turned out, his fears were not completely unfounded. Snape had assigned them with practicing nonverbal spells, and naturally made an example of a struggling Harry, which had ended in him mouthing off in detention on Saturday night. Draco was rubbing his temples as he left the class to Hermione chastising him for his lack of control, Weasley's laughter for Harry's cheek, and Harry's outrage at Snape's behavior. "What's Dumbledore playing at anyway, letting him teach defense?" Harry ranted. "Did you hear him talking about the dark arts? He loves them. All that unfixed, indestructible stuff."
"Well," Hermione interrupted him, raising an eyebrow, "I thought he sounded a bit like you."
"Like me?" Harry spluttered indignant.
"Yes, when you were telling us what it's like to face Voldemort. You said it wasn't just memorizing spells. You said it was just you and your brains and your guts. Well, wasn't that what Snape was saying? That it really comes down to being brave and quick thinking?"
Harry was staring at her, red-faced and speechless, as if it wasn't sure whether to shout or not. Draco heaved a deep sigh, shaking his head. "Listen, we know you dislike Snape," he said tiredly. "We know he's unfair to you, and I hate to see him treating you the way he does too, but you make it too easy on him. If you keep mouthing off like that, you make yourself vulnerable. Believe me, you don't want to spend the school year in detention with him." Before Harry could answer to that, one of the former Gryffindor beaters called out for him, effectively ending their discussion by handing him a message from Dumbledore with the time and date of their first private lesson, which was, most conveniently, within the time frame of Snape's detention. So, instead of talking in circles about Snape, they held a discourse over what Dumbledore would be teaching Harry throughout lunch at the Gryffindor table, which Draco considered a far safer subject indeed. After lunch, they all had double potions together. Draco had been wary of that particular class, seeing that what he had heard of Slughorn until now was less than favorable, and when they entered the classroom, his suspicions were pretty much confirmed. Slughorn greeted Harry like an old friend, seeming incredibly pleased to find him in his class, and poured, if not an equal measure of enthusiasm, at least a considerable amount of it into greeting Zabini, whose mother was well connected through her various marriages, but pretty much ignored everyone else. He pointedly did not look at Draco, which he found very telling. Only months ago, Slughorn would surely have fawned over him for being his father's son. Despite his favoritism, though, Slughorn seemed to be a competent teacher, much more so than Snape, if Draco were to say so. He started the lesson off by introducing them to 4 potions he had displayed at the front, asking them to identify them. Veritaserum, Polyjuice Potion, Amortentia, and Felix Felicis. Draco left it to an overzealous Hermione to answer Slughorn's questions, earning Gryffindor house points and herself the teacher's sympathy, allowing himself to get distracted by the scent of the love potion instead, closing his eyes and inhaling deeply. He was unsurprised by the aromas he smelled, having pondered the matter before when he had come across the potions mentioned in his theoretical studies, and finding that he had been mostly right. He could catch a whiff of fresh air, the kind he could only taste when he was high up in the air on a broom, as well as the scent of old books which he associated with the manor's library. Both were overpowered, though, by the odor that made up Harry, as if someone had melted the boy up into liquid form and added him to the potion as an ingredient.
"It's supposed to smell differently to each of us according to what attracts us."
Hermione was babbling away to the class excitedly.
"And I can smell freshly made grass and new parchment and—"
Draco grinned and opened his eyes, turning his head to exchange a taunting look with Hermione, but was sidetracked when he found Harry staring at him, gaze intense and unreadable. The smirk fell off Draco's face, and he raised his eyebrows at Harry in question. Harry flushed and quickly shook his head, averting his eyes to stare straight ahead. Draco frowned, redirecting his gaze to the front of the class as well, unsure what had just transpired.
"And now,"
Slughorn said after he was done discussing the dangers of Amortentia with some of the students,
"it is time for us to start work."
"So you haven't told us what's in this one," said Ernie Macmillan, pointing to the smallest cauldron containing the Felix Felicis.
"Aha!"
Slughorn said rather dramatically.
"Yes, that. Well, that one, ladies and gentlemen, is a most curious little potion called Felix Felicis."
Hermione gasped, and Draco was a little surprised she only recognized the potion now. The color was rather telling in his opinion. But Slughorn smiled happily, turning to her and prompting,
"I take it that you know what Felix Felicis does, Miss Granger?"
He could hear frustrated whispers from a couple of Ravenclaw girls in the back, and Draco couldn't really blame them. He knew Hermione was making a spectacle of herself, and Slughorn was eating it up. If she wasn't basically his best friend, he'd be annoyed too.
"It's liquid luck,"
Hermione called, unperturbed.
"It makes you lucky."
Draco noted out of the corner of his eye that Not seemed to perk up at her words, now finally paying full attention to Slughorn as he recited the aspects of Felix Felicis when before he had seemed completely disinterested. And that, Slughorn concluded his little lesson on the luck potion, drawing Draco from his thoughts and his eyes away from Not, is what I shall be offering as a prize for this lesson. He took one miniature corked bottle of the golden potion out of his pocket and held it up in the air for everyone to see. Draco raised his eyebrows. One tiny bottle of Felix Felicis, enough for 12 hours of luck. From dawn till dusk you will be lucky in everything you attempt. The whole class was hanging on his lips now, and Draco was a little baffled that a teacher would give out a restricted potion like that into the hands of an underage student, no matter how talented. Even as Slughorn continued to warn them about the regulations of the potion's usage, banned throughout competitions of all sorts, as well as examinations or elections, Draco did wonder if it would not end up being misused. He eyed Not's eager expression once more, determined to make sure it would not end up in his hands. So, Slughorn announced briskly, how are you going to win this prize? Well, by turning to page 10 of Advanced Potion Making. We have a little over an hour left to us, which should be time for you to make a decent attempt at the Draught of Living Death. I know it is more complex than anything you have attempted before, and I do not expect a perfect potion from anybody. The person who does best, however, will win little Felix here. Off you go. And with that, they scrambled towards their seats and started preparing. Harry, seated next to him as usual, had to borrow a book from the school's spares, seeing that he had not anticipated being allowed to take up potions with an exceeds expectation in his owls under Snape's guidance, and now needed to file a belated owl order for his supplies. He was also going back and forth between getting ingredients from the school's storage and borrowing utensils off Draco's kit. Draco was not bothered, though, so used to helping Harry out in potions, that it felt like a second nature to have his work interrupted to hand him whatever he needed. That was why he almost did not notice when, unlike the usual disaster Harry tended to produce, his potion was actually good this time. Better than both Draco's and Hermione's even, something Draco did not realize until shortly before his time ran out, and he had to watch quite astounded as Harry was declared the clear winner of this lesson's competition. Slughorn, predictably, was delighted, making quite a show of drawing parallels between Harry's talent for potions and his mother's, before finally handing him the bottle of Felix Felicis. Draco kept staring at Harry's potion, though, intrigued at Harry's sudden prowess for the subject. He'd known that Snape had been holding Harry back. How badly he'd done earlier with the nonverbal spells when Hermione and Draco had mastered them almost immediately and shown that beyond a doubt. But for him to suddenly be that adept at it? Draco got his answer later when they settled at the Great Hall for dinner.
It was the book I borrowed,
Harry confided under his breath as he shoveled pie onto his plate.
Someone's written instructions in them, and I followed them. First I did it accidentally, but it worked, so I continued, and, well, turns out whoever that bloke is, he really understood his potions.
Draco was looking at him with raised eyebrows, unable to suppress a smile, stretching his lips. You crafty little bugger! He hissed, chuckling despite himself. That was so Slytherin of you!
Well, yes, hanging out with you must have rubbed off on me.
Harry grinned, his eyes sparkling. Hermione's face, though, was murderous as she looked back and forth between them, and Harry rolled his eyes.
I suppose you think I cheated,
he sighed.
But it wasn't exactly your own work, was it? She snapped.
To be fair, it was, Draco snorted. He brewed the potion just like we did, only with different instructions.
Yeah, it could have been a catastrophe, couldn't it? Weasley frowned, but he took a risk and it paid off.
He drew a dramatic sigh. Slughorn could have found and made that book, but no, I get the one no one's ever written in. Puked on, by the look of page 52, but...
Hang on,
Ginny interrupted him, appearing between Draco and Harry to peer at them judgmentally.
Did I hear right? You've been taking orders from something someone wrote in a book, Harry? And you,
she rounded on Draco,
let him...
No, wait a moment, Draco called, affronted. It's not like that.
It's nothing,
Harry agreed.
It's just an old textbook someone scribbled in.
But you're doing what it says,
she demanded, her voice sharp.
I just tried a few tips written in the margins. Honestly, Ginny, there's nothing funny.
Ginny's got a point,
Hermione interrupted them, her tone icy.
We ought to check there's nothing odd about it. I mean, all these funny instructions, who knows?
You get really bitter when someone is better at you at anything. You know that, right? Draco commented. The glare he received in response was more potent than all their draughts of living death combined. His words also prompted her to pull Harry's bag towards her and find the copy of Advanced Potion Making, completely ignoring their friend's protests. She raised her wand and directed a few revelation charms at it, only to find nothing happening. Draco leaned back in his seat, grinning.
Finished?
Harry demanded angrily.
Or do you want to wait and see if it does a few backflips?
It seems all right.
Hermione admitted, quite unwillingly.
I mean, it really does seem to be just a textbook.
Good. Then I'll have it back.
Harry said decisively, taking the book and his bag from her hands, but it slipped from his hands and landed in Draco's lap, opened on the first page. Draco lifted it up and caught sight of an inscription on the inside of the cover page reading, "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." Draco frowned and handed the book back to Harry, pointing at the inscription. Harry read it, eyebrows drawn up thoughtfully, and their eyes met. Then he shrugged and closed the book, putting it away and returning to his dinner. Harry kept following the so-called Half-Blood Prince's unofficial instructions throughout their potions classes, with similarly spectacular results, quickly earning him the fake reputation of the best potioneer of the whole year with Slughorn, much to Hermione's consternation. Harry, trying to make peace with her, offered to share the book with them, a suggestion which only made her more furious with him, as she stubbornly stuck to the official instructions, trying to outdo him the legitimate way, just to prove a point. When she did not succeed, she took it out on Harry, which was why they usually parted ways for a couple of hours after their potions classes now. Draco, on the other hand, did not share Hermione's scruples, and neither, it seemed, did Weasley. Both had found themselves glancing in Harry's book every now and then, though Weasley had quickly given up, frustrated with the prince's messy handwriting. Draco didn't mind that part much. Harry's handwriting was only minimally better than the prince's, and he had spent years deciphering that, so he was well versed in hieroglyphics. He only ever caught part of the instructions, though, so his results were never as flawless as Harry's, and even if they were, he doubted Slughorn would have taken notice, as he seemed dead set upon ignoring him. Towards the end of their first week, Harry, thankfully, had something else to focus on than the prince's book, taking the edge off Hermione's anger, at least for a couple of hours. His private lesson with Dumbledore. With Dumbledore's permission, Harry filled the three of them in on every detail as they were sprawled out on a deserted spot on the grounds on Sunday after breakfast, enjoying the last feelers of the summer weather. Though Draco had a feeling that Hermione and Weasley had heard most of Harry's tale the night before, and were now humoring Draco as Harry told it again for his benefit. He did not comment on it, though, instead focusing on the tale of the Dark Lord's mother, a girl called Merope Gaunt, who hailed from an impoverished pureblood family with connections leading directly back to Salazar Slytherin, but who had been mistreated by her cruel and deranged father and fallen into an obsessive, one-sided love with Tom Riddle, a rich muggle boy from the village they'd lived in. Draco's insides constricted half in pity, half in disgust, as Harry described how she had ultimately enchanted Riddle to love her and run away with her. In the end, after she had fallen pregnant, she had lifted the spell, in the delusion that he'd stay without it, which Riddle, not being a very decent person himself, did not have in him. Merope fell ill and died shortly after giving birth, leaving the child at a muggle orphanage with nothing but a name. Draco was silent for a long moment after Harry had finished, lost in thought, and when he looked up at Harry, green eyes were already on him, watching his profile.
"So this is what these lessons are about," Draco said finally. "For you to get to know the Dark Lord. For you to figure him out. Because you can't win against an enemy you don't know. You need to find out his weaknesses. It makes sense." "It's not what I expected," Harry admitted, frowning a little. "Information is all well and nice, but it won't help me in a fight."
"Information is power, Harry," Draco contradicted.
"The Dark Lord is pretty strong, and no matter how much Dumbledore teaches you, he'll always know more dark magic than you do. You know that, and I know that, so this might be a better strategy. If you can't kill something with force, do it with logic." "I've never been very good at that,"
Harry sighed.
"That's what you have us for."
Draco elbowed him, smiling. Harry couldn't help but smile back, and their eyes caught for a long moment, neither of them speaking. Draco's throat felt dry, and his heartbeat sped up. and he wasn't sure why. The moment was abruptly broken when Hermione spoke up, and Draco felt horrible, realizing that he'd almost forgotten that she and Weasley were present. So would Harry if his violent twitch was anything to go by.
I think Draco's right.
Hermione said thoughtfully, her unseeing eyes focused on a faraway scene across the lake.
I think Dumbledore must be leading up to something with all this information. Something that will help you destroy him.
Let's just hope it's going to be something great. Weasley muttered sleepily, his eyes closed where he was sprawled out next to her. I mean, sure, the combined minds of you two was something fearsome to behold, but it would be a nice change if the information was handed to us clear and simple for once. Harry snorted, smiling as he shook his head. I won't argue with you there, mate. He glanced at Draco out of the corner of his eyes, but when their eyes met again, he quickly looked away. Draco was left to stare up at the cloudless sky, berating his racing heart. The following week continued much like the last, with Harry outperforming everyone in potions, while showing decidedly less favorable results in defense against the dark arts, and additionally any class where he was required to use non-verbal spells. Draco did sit down with him once throughout the week to practice the use of them, since Hermione solemnly refused any form of help, still sulking because of the Half-Blood Prince's book. But strangely enough, their study sessions seemed to completely throw Harry off track. Harry appeared surprisingly scatterbrained in the half-hour Draco tried to make it work, confusing spells and ultimately setting the cushion on the empty armchair the Room of Requirement had provided on fire by attempting a simple Expelliarmus. What is wrong with you today? Draco inquired after casting an Aguamenti on the still smoky cushion. Is it Expelliarmus your specialty? Harry's face was red. He moved slightly away from Draco towards the farthest corner of the couch they were sharing. He was looking anywhere but at him. Non-verbal spells really aren't that difficult, Draco continued when Harry didn't answer. You just need to focus. I don't know where your mind was just now, but... Yeah, okay. Harry interrupted him, quickly clearing his throat. I think I should, study the rest on my own. It's late. Harry frowned, side-eyeing him. It's just past 7, he pointed out. I still have homework, Harry argued. We finished our assignment for Transfiguration earlier today, Draco pointed out. What homework do you have that I don't? I didn't finish that potions essay. But didn't we do that yesterday at the library? I want to rewrite some parts, they're rubbish. Draco didn't say anything. Harry rewriting essays and putting that much effort into potions homework in general was something unheard of, and they both knew it. But Harry seemed content with his excuse, getting to his feet as quickly as he could without it looking like he was actually jumping up, his face still unnaturally red. I'll see you tomorrow, Draco, he muttered, heading for the door. All right, Draco frowned, looking after him. Good night. He got no answer, and then Harry had rushed through the door like a niffler after a gold coin. Draco sat there by himself for a long time, wondering what in Merlin's name he was missing.